And so it came to pass that the final big release in the prog sphere has landed, and yeah, we have a lot of opinions about this record. I have seen a lot of my contemporaries, a lot of my friends gush and talk about this record, and I seem to be kind of the black sheep of the crowd in this one. I have a little bit of a slightly different opinion than a lot of my friends. So with that energy, let's dive into this one. The Last Will and Testament by Opeth. So Opeth, I don't think needs any kind of an introduction. If you're not inoculated by the Opeth cult at this point, summarizing it really quickly, Stockholm, Sweden is where these boys hail from. Getting their start in the mid-90s by being a massive, successful, like, death metal band. 99, they put out Still Life, which really catapulted them more onto the prog side. So even, like, prog lovers were getting into this band, and that's kind of how I found out about them, just through the prog scene itself. And it was this band that got me into the death metal growls. And then since Still Life, we've had banger after banger after banger after banger after certified friggin' banger. And then 2011 drops with Heritage. And that's the one thing that I always enjoy about Opeth, is that they're not afraid to take risks. They're not afraid to do something new and to experiment. And they're not afraid of, like, almost distancing their fan base just to follow their own inspiration. And sometimes that works, especially in these past couple of years. And sometimes it doesn't, especially in these last couple of years. So, yeah, I feel like since Heritage, we've gotten a little bit of a mixed grab bag. You know, gone are the days of Blackwater Park and Deliverance and, you know, Ghost Reveries and Watershed, of those really solid, progressive death metal, you know, death metal first, prog just kind of being the sauce on top. Now it's like, no, the sauce is now the meat, and now the death metal isn't even really part of the equation. Which is a bit of a shame, because Pale Communion's my favorite record from them. And In Caught and Venom has a really special place in my heart. I really love that record. Sorceress and Heritage have really great moments on them, but I feel like overall it's a little bit more of a mixed grab bag. So, coming into The Last Will and Testament, it's been a while. You know, 2008 was their last record that had growls on it. So it's been a while, and the growls are back. The growls are back. And we also have our first narrative storyline, our first narrative concept record from this band since Still Life, since 1999. So, like, there's been, like, concept adjacent albums that they've had, like Watershed did a lot of, like, haunting and family aspect things. Ghost Reservoirs have done kind of like being haunted on an individual level. Blackwater Park has a lot of, you know, really interesting concepts going on with it, but like straight up narrative concept, this is the first one we've had since the 90s. So yeah, and the concept itself is really interesting. You know, it's literally the last will and testament, and each song is a different paragraph of this will that's being read out. So that in itself is really interesting. It's really like a really interesting concept. And you got mainly like the four main characters. You have the two twins that are expecting to inherit everything. This girl that, you know, very sick, that the family took in, and then the actual like narrator, both the father figure himself and then the individual that's reading it out. And it's almost like you're hearing the words of the father figure, this patriarch, that's just like, you can still feel the haunting going on in this. And that's one of the things that I do appreciate within this context, because sure, you have the narrative story and all the twists and turns of like, okay, what's going on with the twins? What's going on with the sickly girl? What's going on with, you know, this maid character and all these other like tertiary characters? But really what I particularly love is how they play with the concept of haunting. And that's a concept that Opeth really likes to play with. I mean, look at Ghost Reservoirs, Watershed, and Blackwater Park. But having that be like almost this secondary character, you know, it's this presence that even after the father figure is gone, his presence is still felt and his consequences are still felt, and how that influences and how it affects the rest of the family still very much felt, and that's felt within the music itself. So yeah, let's talk about this. I will admit, and I want to start this off right from the very beginning. When I first listened to this record, I had a big old mix of emotions. I was pleasantly surprised. I was a little let down. I was a little confused. I was excited and then disappointed. And There's a lot going on, which is really strange because this is one of the shorter records at just over 50 minutes. A lot of, Opeth's albums go into the hour long or sometimes even 80 minutes. Yeah, the runtime itself is interesting. I feel like this album is either too short or too long, and I can't quite figure out which way I want to go. In the way that it is too long, I feel like it does drag at certain parts. There's a lot of tracks on here that are same. Because we have a unified concept, the music itself is quite unified. You've got this really dirgy, very like acid rock from the 70s, like classic Black Sabbath sounds on here that have that dark atmosphere about it. It's very rhythmic in that sense. It has a lot of that atmospheric dirge that we would get from, like the Blackwater Park and Damnation kind of sessions in that sense. But they don't quite stick the landing in terms of some of the more solo-y moments on here. Like with Ackefeldt and Atkinson's guitar work, because both of them kind of play off and trade off lead guitars, they're not really given the space that they have been given in the past to allow those really big and meaty soaring guitar licks to really shine, like a Burden from Watershed or some of the more meaty moments from Ghost Reveries or Blackwater Park. It's not given that space that I'm used to with those big soaring guitar licks. Like they're still there, but I feel like they're there and then they're almost moved to the side. And so on the one hand, like I said, this album feels very long because we're just going from passage to passage to passage to passage with not a whole lot of variation, but it also feels too short because the runtime, as I mentioned, is one of the shorter of the whole bunch. And so I'm waiting for that space, and I wonder if we condense some of the tracks. Instead of having 8 tracks, I think having, say, about maybe 6 or even 5, but then grow out these tracks to, 8, 9, 10, even maybe 11 minutes to provide those really meaty moments and those really special moments, the space and the air in order to breathe and become more memorable in that sense. I think we would have had a little bit more of a polished end product in that sense. Now, I don't want to, shit all over this entire album because, as with all Opeth albums, there are many moments in which this really does shine. Coming back to the concept, I love that each track is just like a single paragraph of this Will and Testament. And so each track is just paragraph 1 or section 1, and it goes all the way through that until we get to track 8, which is kind of like the epilogue, this kind of lost story. And that's what the track is called. It's called The Story Never Told. It's like this little asterisk that even Patriarch and this big menacing figure maybe you didn't even know about, and I kind of like that there's a little bit of ambiguity left about all this. So yeah. I also love some of the features that are on here, like Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull is kind of the narrator. Let's try that again. Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull is the main narrator. He comes in with a lot of spoken word aspects, and his voice leads this haunting aspect to it where you feel the spirit of this, big, powerful entity kind of still looming over it. And his spoken word aspects are really, like, it adds something to it. Because I find with spoken word, it kind of goes, one of two ways when you come into a, big album like this. And I think it works to its advantage. Also, his flute playing is really good. Again, much like Ackefeldt's and Atkinson's guitar works, I feel like it's not quite given the true space that's needed in order to kind of grab the attention. It's one of those things that you really need to digest and you really need to take in to allow for that meaty aspect to take flourish. Another terms in terms of like personnel is the drumming. So Axe unfortunately is gone. He left, sometime during the 2020s. And yeah, now we have, oh boy, I'm going to try this. I'm so sorry, all these Swedish names on here. Waltakuri Vainaren, I think. He comes in to fill Axe's shoes. And again, just as a quick little aside, my favorite drummer from the band is always going to be Martin Lopez. He's my goat in terms of drummers in the progressive metal scene. Nobody does it like Martin. But, Axe filled the shoes quite well. I felt like Lopez was much more of a smooth and almost jazzy approach, whereas Axe was much more of a powerhouse. And I feel like this guy here, Verinen, I'm so sorry, guys, he's a little bit of a blending. Like, at no point does it feel like a massive powerhouse. And at no point do I feel like it really wows me. But in order to keep time with these guys, because there's a lot of passages on here that have really complex rhythm sections, and half the time it's really the rhythm section that is the track itself, his presence can really be felt, and it really captures that spirit that Opeth is going for. And then from there, we've got the usual suspects that's been with the band for quite a while. On keyboards, we have Salivberg. He's been with the band since Heritage. I already mentioned Frederick Akison. And Martin Mendez, who's been, Martin on the friggin' bass. Like, the bass work that's found on here, the bottom of this album, it goes on for leagues. I feel like Martin Mendez and Volatier, the drummer guy, I feel like these two are really playing off each other really well in a charismatic way that I feel like Martin and Axe never really had. Like, there was almost like this tension that was found between these two that is being unified here, and it almost disappears. Like that whole rhythm section, it just blends into one entity. I've been watching a lot of Steven Universe, so it's almost like these gems are fusing into a single entity, and I absolutely, that's one of the big highlights on this record. And now that we're talking about highlights, let's get into some of the things that I really do appreciate and love about this record. The flow of this record, quite nice. Like, even though I had mentioned that a lot of these tracks feel same, like the first 3 tracks, I would say, I feel like there's a lot of treading water, and I'm kind of outside of the story, kind of waiting for a good pick up and go track. Like, I love the drive and I love the dirge of the first track. It lays the groundwork of what you're going to expect for the rest of the tracks. And I really enjoy more of the experimental jazzy stuff that we would get from the second track, and some of the more kind of solo-y moments. Like, again, it kind of goes from one passage to another passage to another passage without really allowing the sticking there. For me, it really isn't until the 4th track, section 4, that it starts to pick up, especially with the ending of this track. This is where I love this Opeth styling of building the song up to a beautiful climax. Like, that play out of this track just soars. It's one of the few moments that I have stuck in my head after listening to this record, and those moments are kind of rare on this one. Like, it's got that really heavy and really aggressive moments that, the band has played with. The band has played with this kind of aggression before, especially within the Opeth era, but it's bringing in that sharp edge that I feel like they haven't really brought in since Watershed. Like, I remember that when they were going into the session to record Heritage, Michael Ekefeld had essentially done 2 demo tracks and then just deleted them. And I feel like this might be relics of those 2 tracks, of just how ingrained in that kind of sessions. And then it's bled right into the 5th track. And I think section 5 might be my favorite track off this album, not just because it's the longest at 7.5 minutes, but it starts in a really fun and really kind of bouncing feel to it. It kind of feels like folklore from Heritage or eras from Sorceress, that kind of like Western feel that Michael really likes to play with. And I'm surprised he hasn't kind of dug a little bit deeper into that rhythm and that styling, this kind of like Western, spaghetti Western, fistful of pennies kind of an idea, or the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I just wish that more of that feeling was found on here. It's fun. It has a lot more of a bop to it. And that ending on this track just, it's once again, we have that smooth rhythm that I love from this whole Opeth era. I love how it really grounds itself into this track, and it's blend right into the final 2 tracks of section 6 and 7. So like, once we get to section 4, this album really does pop off. It's just a shame that the first 3 don't have that same kind of oomph, and like, I love section 6. Section 7, I love the ending of this. Again, it's that soaring guitar works, that atmosphere that Opeth is able to capture. It is, and I've known some people are saying like, this is the blending of the old Opeth with the new Opeth to create something new. I would say that they're taking influences from wherever they can find it within their discographies. But I think they really are kind of taking what they had with Incauda Vinenum and then progress the music forward. I feel like this is a logical progression within their stylings, taking kind of that really interesting music that they were creating with Incauda Vinenum and continuing it on with a little bit of a darker tone, a little bit more of a sharper edge. It's just a shame that the 8th track of A Story Never Told is trying to capture some of the more intimate moments. It's kind of that twist at the end. R.L. Stine always says that a good story has a beginning, middle, and a twist. And I feel like this is the twist. But I feel like they're also trying to channel, Isolation Years from, the one, Ghost Reservoirs, but also Burden from Watershed. And I feel like it doesn't quite have that same heart. It doesn't have that same drive that I'm used to with those tracks. So, yeah, in the end, I will say that The Last Will and Testament from Opeth, for me, is a little bit of a disappointment, but it's still a fantastic record. I feel like this is better overall and as a whole than Sorceress or Heritage, but I would say that it's not quite as good as Pale Communion or Incon Envenenum. It's kind of in that little sandwich. If this was an Oreo cookie, this is the white stuff. I think that this is going to be a record that I will put on from time to time, but I don't think I'm going to come back to as much as I do Still Life, or basically any records from Still Life all the way to Watershed, and then Incon Envenenum and Pale Communion. It's not a bad album because Opeth hasn't released a bad album, but what I found was after digesting and listening to this record for so long, I've grown to appreciate albums like Sorceress a little bit more, because Sorceress and Heritage have some really, really meaty moments, and there are moments on there that I think are better than anything found on The Last Will and Testament. But from start to finish, I think this is a much more solid album than Heritage or Sorceress. So that's kind of where I'm leaning for this album. And I think my final rating of this album will be The Last Will and Testament by Opeth. It's an album I would absolutely download. This rating is also with an asterisk because it's an Opeth record. I have to own it. So I did buy it in physical format, even though my rating is to download it. There you go. That's what I thought about The Last Will and Testament. I am really excited to see how this album is going to age, because it's quite dense. So I want to know kind of how this is going to age in about a year or two. If it's going to increase in value or if it's going to decrease. What's the longevity? What are the legs on this album? I also want to know what you guys think about this record. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you find it's a little bit of a disappointment? Is it a return to form? Is it the big masterpiece that we've been waiting for since Heritage? Let me know all about your thoughts by commenting down below. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys for today. So, thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.